Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. Hello and welcome. Just so you're all aware, this session is being recorded. My name's Ollie Howson. I'm a lecturer at the Open University in the UK, and I'll be the moderator for this ADEIL conference session. Before we begin, on behalf of ADEIL, we'd like to thank our generous sponsor, Noodle, and our host, Old Dominion University. We're very thankful for their contributions in making this event possible. So everyone's aware, I will be randomly selecting winners at each conference session for prizes and swag. I will announce the winner at the end. There is a very, very technical decision-making process wherein I'm going to go to decide who wins. So make sure that I can see you on my screen, a list of names, and I will announce the winner of that at the end of the session. If you're not here at the end, then I'm going to take your name off and put somebody else in. So with no more messing around with me, thank you for joining us for ChatGPT. Higher Education is Too Slow. Please welcome Nick Janos, the Professor of Sociology for California State University, and Zach Justus, Professor of Communication, Arts and Sciences, also at California State University. So I'll now pass over to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We're going to switch over so you can see the slide deck. Should be able to see it now. Hi, I'm Zach Justus, Chico State, Faculty Development.
Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
Our presentation today is about the sort of mismatch between the rapid pace of change with artificial intelligence and higher ed. So just to give you some background, Nick and I started writing about and experimenting with AI back in January. We were both just interested in our own classes. We started organizing a work group in the spring of just some people around campus, some staff, some faculty that were interested in the technology. And then early on, we experienced the sort of mismatch between the rapid pace of change with artificial intelligence and the pace of change in higher ed institutions. Our presentation today highlights 4 disruptions of the traditional mode of regulation at a university like ours, which is a shared governance collective bargaining environment, and a pace of change with artificial intelligence. Traditional process, like I said, is represented here in collective bargaining and shared governance environments. We realize that's not the environment that everybody finds themselves in. Nevertheless, I think that a lot of the same thematics are going to run across institutions regardless of the governance structure.
So we wanted to start off hearing from you. So we devised a little Padlet with one question, or actually one topic and 3 different questions. So we want to know a little bit about what campus governance is like at your institution. And specifically, we want to ask these 3 questions. What do you think are the most painful bureaucratic processes on your campus? What policies and procedures do you perceive as in need of revision as it pertains to AI in particular? And if you are a God King on your campus for one day, what committee or policy would you scrap and start over? So there's a link in the chat. You can also use the QR code that we had up to access the Padlet. So we'd like to hear your thoughts.
And if you don't want to type in, but you do want to talk, unmute yourself, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Oh, I see some people in the Padlet.
Hey, that's good.
That's good. I'll share while people are hopefully typing in that one of the most painful things on our campus has to do with changing curriculum, which even if you want to change a course description or maybe what is a prerequisite for a course, that is a change that over an entire life cycle may take somewhere in between 6 months and a year and a half. And sometimes for what seems like a relatively straightforward change, it is an impossibly long process. Okay, so we're starting to get some pieces in. Unclear path to adoption of a new policy. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that stretches across lots of different policymaking structures. All the ones that are more than 1 page and don't have a flow chart. Yeah, I like that. How about, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, there we go. Someone wants to be a God
finally.
king. Okay.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, maybe you could change the Outlook function so that it literally cannot schedule a meeting for longer than 30 minutes. I could dig that. Regulations on animal work and experimentation. Free education. I like that, whoever wrote that. AI use. Yeah, poignant. All right, well, feel free to keep typing in the end pieces there. Nick, is there anything else that you want to highlight before we move on to the deck?
No, just to say that these kind of questions here are things that we're going to explore as we go through our presentation today.
Yeah, so we might come back to this, but also keep these things in mind. Nick and I have timed this out so that we'll have time for question, answer, and comment at the end. At the same time, if you have something that is really sort of like popping into your head, don't hesitate to drop it into the chat or even unmute yourself. We're friendly and we can manage more than one thing at a time. So yeah, if you have a question or a comment, don't hesitate to pop it in. Okay. So with that, we're going to get to the sort of main structure of the presentation, which revolves around 4 sites of disruption that have been presented with artificial intelligence, and then sort of understanding how revision would work and process structures that we currently have in place at our institution, which, like I said, is mainly representative of shared governance, collective bargaining institutions, but there are threads here that stretch across all of higher ed. So the first one, and I think probably the place that most of us first became concerned with artificial intelligence, has to do with academic integrity. So ChatGPT and a number of other large language models have presented students with a different way to outsource their work. And, we're all friendly here. I think we all know that this is something that happened before in different formats, right? Like you could pay somebody in a different country, or maybe somebody else in the same class, to write a paper for you or to complete a homework assignment. But large language models made that accessible, and they took the entry barrier for getting someone else or something else to do substantive work in the class from high down to virtually non-existent. And that way they made it extremely accessible to people, regardless of where they were geographically. And there were sort of low and sometimes lower or non-existent entry barriers in terms of cost. And then something that we learned relatively quickly was that we didn't have a reliable system to check whether or not the response, let's say, to an essay prompt or to a short answer was generated by artificial intelligence or was perhaps generated by a person or some combination thereof. So these things happen really fast. One of the things that Nick and I were reflecting on is that just 6 months ago, we were doing our first webinar about this. And at that point, it seemed like a reasonable response was to ask students about current events, because ChatGPT was frozen in time and trained on data from September 21 and before. That just seems naive and silly now, but that was just a couple of months ago that seemed like a pretty reasonable response. So how academic integrity policies work on our campus and on many campuses is that you would aggregate cases together. There would be an emergent trend. Hey, students are doing this. And then you would revise that policy, and there's generally a subcommittee broken out to do that. And then that would have to go in front of an academic senate or another governing body for approval. On our campus, this whole process might take close to a year. So one of the interesting things that I was thinking about when I was reviewing our deck this morning is that even if you had started off and you were aggregating cases for this from the moment that ChatGPT launched in late November of last year, and you got cases together, you established some trends, and then you put those pieces together and you're like, here's a new policy. Even if you had moved as fast as humanly possible and gotten a new policy on the books in a matter of months, it would already be out of date, right? Because of some of the things that Ollie's actually typing into the chat here, right? Like the integration of ChatGPT with the web via the Bing plugin, the integration of new models, not even new technologies, but just new techniques for prompting that have made the systems that we had to check this sort of thing even more obsolete than they were from the jump. So here's our first highlight of the mismatch between the rapid pace of change, right? Like going from a data set that was frozen in time and was relatively limited in what it could produce to now something that is plugged into the web and even multimodal, where you can have it unpack images or create images on its own.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing just here is in that revised integrity policy piece is, as you're, I'm sure, familiar with your institution, is that there is no coherence or consensus about what people think should a policy be. You know, our university, probably like yours, there's people all over the spectrum about what their views on student use of generative AI in the classroom or at home, things like that. So even in best case scenario of going fast, that's going to be a while before those different dialogues shake out.
That's a great point, Nick, because like part of the thing about is we would have to reach some sort of consensus or like have a central office mandate.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Nick.
So the second disruption that we began thinking about early on when we, back in January, was when we would just sit around brainstorming, like, how is this going to change higher education and our university, is around retention, tenure, and promotion. The RTP is what we call it here at Chico. So if students are using generative AI to do their work in different capacities, then obviously faculty are too. And there's lots of resources now about how faculty can use this to make their jobs easier, more efficient, and just kind of be that assistant co-pilot in different ways. But there's also some disruptions here around how we promote and grant tenure based upon the achievements and basically what you've done in your career as a scholar, as a teacher, and as someone who does service on the campus. So in our collective bargaining, we have 3 areas of review for retention, tenure, and promotion. That is teaching, scholarship, and service. And in each one of these, there are potential disruptions here around faculty perhaps using generative AI to write multiple papers, for example. If they use generative AI to do 80% of work on a paper or in data crunching and things like that, and other faculty who aren't doing those kinds of activities, it becomes a question of equity and fairness around, what are we assessing when we, for example, talk about scholarly output. For example, if you have a point system and you're awarded different points based upon how many articles you publish or books and things like that. In teaching, part of the teaching that you're evaluated on is course content, course design, assignments, and things like that. And so AI-generated course material is another area that we would run into similar kinds of issues there. And the third one around service, and one that we actually think is actually somewhat most enticing, are those, piling up of, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? Most of us do that, and often it's kind of tedious and frankly, at this point, for most people, a form letter, essentially, that you just kind of like plug in, nuance and different things for different people, but you're kind of writing the same thing over and over. The same with the RTP reports themselves. We literally just like copy and paste from before and just wordsmith it around to make it a newish document. So in fact, using generative AI to complete service work also, adds that kind of question. Like, what are you doing? Is that service if you're just kind of like prompting, ChatGPT to pump out letters of rec or to write reports and things like that? Now, at our university here, there's this sort of process for RTP changes that you can think of it somewhat like a seesaw. There's, sometimes they originate at the local level, departmental level. They see some issues that they want to change. That leads to at least about a year of discussion and then revision that then has to be approved by academic affairs, the sort of master unit on campus that would approve that. But sometimes those changes come from Senate or from academic affairs, and that's the seesaw motion where that pushes it down, and then departments then have to reconfigure and redo that. This process to do all of this could sometimes take up to 3 years to revise RTP documents in that sort of back and forth seesawing kind of motion from top down and bottom up.
And again, that's only if we know what the right policy is right now, which I'm certainly not one to claim that we do. There are certain areas here I have totally used ChatGPT in order to help generate ideas for a biography section for a paper that I was writing, rearrange and help me with references. Nick and I have talked about it for letters of rec quite a bit, right? Like, I don't know what the policy should be here, but the idea that this takes, like Nick said, 2 to 3 years, and that's only if we know what we're doing right now, is a horrible misalignment.
Yeah, and Ollie makes a point here. We wouldn't think less of a colleague who chooses to use a typewriter or refuses to use a calculator. That's up to our presentation today. Is not about what these policies should look like or whether it's right or wrong to use the AI, but really to try to highlight how slow as molasses that these institutions of higher learning are when faced with disruptions and what that might mean for all of this.
So the third piece is one that I alluded to earlier, and that is the process of curriculum and also curriculum revision and also of assessment. So there's no doubt that some of our curriculum needs revision, right? And there's been a race to sort of think about how can you ChatGPT proof any particular assignment. And that's I think that lots of us are coming to the realization that that's short-sighted and not really always possible, that we don't need to proof our assignments. What we need to do is think about how our curriculum needs to be different. I jokingly mentioned in a meeting the other day that, like, I don't want us to become the university of typewriters and buggy whips, right? Like, that's not, if curriculum needs to change to reflect the new world of the workforce, that means it needs to change. Some curriculum needs to be deleted. I'm in communications. Some of my closest friends and colleagues work in journalism and public relations. Part of what they do is teach people how to write basic copy. To say that, I'm not even sure that's a skill that exists anymore or is relevant anymore. At the very least, it is radically changed. So some curriculum needs to just be wiped off the books and then replaced with other pieces. And then some curriculum needs to be added, right? Like, the advent of generative AI means that then we can all develop competencies in other areas outside of our expertise, or at least produce stuff that is passable in those places. And this one is unbelievably complicated. So we have local discussion at the department level, right? Like, do we want to keep this course or replace it with something else? Then we decide, do we need to revise this program? What would the curriculum look like next? And then we have to go around and have agreements with other units. Hey, Nick, we decided to change our program like this. Is that too much overlap with your curriculum in sociology? And then it has to get approved by academic affairs, Senate, and sometimes for us, actually the chancellor's office that oversees all 23 CSU campuses. Needless to say, it is an incredibly labor-intensive and lengthy process. So once again, you see this mismatch between the need to know what we're doing and act now and make changes quickly, and this incredibly drawn out process. The last point that I want to make here is one that I find myself often repeating, and that's, we know whether curriculum is effective based on assessments that we do. And that is an imprecise science, right? Trying to assess student learning. But in a world where student product and AI product have become intermingled, the thing that we have to realize about when we're assessing curriculum is that, to some degree, we're not assessing student learning anymore in those contexts. Instead, we're assessing some mix of student learning and AI proficiency. And, you may think that's great. You may think that's okay. Our point isn't that is a value judgment on that. Our point is that it is substantially different than what we thought we were doing a year ago, and we haven't caught up.
And the fourth disruption we wanted to highlight today is around writing and writing proficiency. And it kind of ties into the assessment that Zach was just talking about. At the CSU, the California State University System, is a gigantic public university system, probably the biggest, I think, in the United States. And part of its mission, going back to the 1960s, is really about developing the skills in the citizenry for affordable higher education. Obviously, the missions have changed over time, but there is running through it that we develop the core competencies of good citizenship for young people across California at a low cost compared. Part of that is writing. And so we do, students have to do, of course, like most places, writing proficiency. And we, have dozens of English professors, right, who are the backbone of the general education writing component. And they take it very seriously that writing is a skill that students, young people, old people, that we should know how to write. Well, obviously this disrupts a lot of that in the sense that we now have a hybrid, a symbiotic relationship that you use the generative AI. Learning how to write becomes a little bit harder if you're having the generative AI sort of produce written work for you. So as it says here, there's no blank pages anymore, in a sense, right? It's hard to assess. We don't know who starts with a blank page and who doesn't. But our colleagues over there who handle a lot of the writing classes take this very seriously, that they find value in and of itself of teaching people how to write, how to edit, and to think through writing. That is being, obviously challenged by the generative AI change. The other one closer to our disciplines, communications and sociology, is writing as a demonstration of understanding. One of the first things we did when we got ChatGPT, the original one last winter, is we just started looking at our assignment prompts. We started asking it the kinds of things we ask our students to do. And as you found, of course, that it blows you away, right? It produces anything from B to A plus type of answers, depending on its output and how you prompt it. And so we started thinking like basic things we do in sociology to understand whether our students understood a reading or understand a concept or can synthesize examples into a theory, really kind of get upended by generative AI. And this is across all sort of disciplines across the university. Now, what we're thinking about here is not whether that is right or wrong, but sort of like, how do we change and think about these policies and structures about writing proficiency? There's the Curriculum Advisory Board that handles the writing graduation requirements and assessment. This works in concert with the Senate subcommittee, the curriculum committee, basically, we'll just call it for that today. Yeah. And it's sort of like back and forth, but of course goes out, with stakeholders at the unit level and individual professors as well. These changes, especially when you're talking about academic senate, could take 1 at best to 2 years at most to sort of go through all of the vetting and back and forth process. But again, if we knew what those standards should be and how they should be revised.
So one of the reasons why Nick and I started working on this and getting interested in this is that we have our own experience here at Chico State. I mentioned earlier that we started our own sort of working group with staff, some other faculty, people just interested. And we started talking about some of these things, some of the implications. And eventually we were like, we need the decision-making body on our campus to sort of take this up. And that for us, that's the academic senate. And so Nick and I wrote a letter to our Senate Executive Committee, and then almost everyone from our working group signed on, and we sent that away. And at first we did not get a response for weeks. Yeah. And then when we did get a response, it was an invitation to come and talk with one of the subcommittees. Then it got canceled. And then we got another invitation to come in, and we talked. The people that we really needed to talk to, not all of them were in the room. And then it was really unclear what the decision-making body was going to do with that information after we left. And we'd submitted this proposal already, but Nick and I were like, we're getting our firsthand account of this incredible disjuncture between the functionalities of the university and the rapid pace of change that we're in. And we have to talk to other people about it. So one of the things that we settled on is we don't have to work this way, right? We all made rapid change during COVID, and we can do that again. And some of that change has gone away, but some of it has stuck. I'm sure that at your home institutions, there have been permanent changes. Nick and I were talking about some of our favorite ones. For me, I have to sign lots of stuff for other people's contracts. And we implemented Adobe Sign here for the first time. When I'd previously been in these type of roles, I would have to book 15 to 30 minutes every day just to sign things. And now that's a process that is streamlined. And we implemented that process virtually overnight. We can make rapid change not everything has to take a year or more. Like Nick said earlier, our call here isn't so much for a change in any particular policy. Our change and our sort of like call to action is about process.
Yep. Well, part of that is one thing that would interest us was other technological disruptions through history, right? Sort of just-in-time production of the Japanese automakers in the late 1970s and early 80s, and what befell the American auto industry. Obviously, the smartphone, or the iPhone in particular, and how you saw Palm and BlackBerry go out of business within 5 years, and radical changes. So radical changes happen fast, and the universities are designed not for radical changes and going fast. And we've also encountered these threats before with the internet, I'm sure, before my time. But Wikipedia, the threat of MOOCs, all these kinds of things. But this one seems different, and this one seems to be moving faster and more sort of at an existential level of getting aimed at towards everything that we do in every capacity, which stretches us all thin and kind of creates all sorts of sort of anxiety about what to do and what the future holds.
But one of the things that we want to sort of close with is that we know that there's anxiety that lots of people are feeling about this technology in this time in higher ed. But we want to emphasize that I think a big part of that anxiety doesn't have to do with the technology itself. It has to do with the fact that our ability to have living documents or at least the rapid change of policies on campus, for the most part, doesn't exist. Or we learned how to do that a couple of years ago, only then to forget about it now. And so from where we sit, it seems like we would be in a better position to deal with this, to be adaptable for this, if we could learn how to engage in the process differently. And from there, we can figure out the policies. Mm-hmm. But if we don't fix how we make change, if we don't fix process, we are never going to be in a position to be as effective as we need to be in this new future.
No.
All right, I'm going to stop share. That's the last of our deck. And we're happy to have discussion, take criticism, have some question and answer.
Hear from your experiences.
Yeah, but we budgeted in plenty of time at the end. Well, yeah, I'm even going to go back to the Padlet to see if we can get some people to talk. But yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts, some of the stuff that's going on your campuses, and like if you perceive some of this same mismatch, especially if you're at a different type of campus that maybe isn't collective bargaining or doesn't have a strong shared governance structure.
Perhaps I'll jump in here since everyone else is too shy to put. Oh, and the hand pops up. I'll come back to me afterwards. Let's go to Steve, shall we?
Yeah, Steve, what's up?
There we go. Oh, it looks like Ollie and I are following the same track. My question to you folks is whether you see the responsibility for addressing these big questions should be generated from the bottom up, or do you see this as being something that ought to be handed down? Isn't really not the right phrase, but it seems like a more leadership issue in some way. And I don't know whether that leadership belongs sort of at the top and descending downwards, or more driven by the application and operationalizing of these different questions in every context. Well, how do you see that working?
Steve, I want to turn that around real quick. What institution are you from?
I work for the University of New Hampshire College of Professional Studies online. So we are 100% fully online degree programs for undergraduate and graduate work, and have been doing that since 1999. So we have no faculty senate. We have all adjunct faculty. We are workforce oriented, continuing education. So the idea of getting wrapped up in sort of that R1 research elite mentality is not where we're at. So, there's a lot of ways in which a tool like artificial intelligence could be very useful when you're thinking about workforce readiness. Not exactly trade training, but in at least in the separation from us thinking purely in the R1 theoretical realm. So does that help?
Yeah. So Steve, at a campus like that, which sounds a lot more agile and flexible than the one that we're at. When change happens, is it like an intermingling of, edicts from up high and a swelling up from underneath, or does it usually come from up high, or how does change usually materialize?
Well, that's just the thing. See, it could work either way. It just seems as though there needs to be some kind of sanction in my mind, so that if I, as an instructional designer, am having conversations with my directors or my SMEs or faculty, for me to be able to take a certain position or to promote a certain strategy for using artificial intelligence or something like this, it's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing for someone on the sort of academic affairs level to say, by the way, we will be thinking about artificial intelligence in this particular way, and we will be emphasizing this use of it more so than this other use for it, so that at least when I step into the conversation, there's a little more, there's something behind it besides what stupid Steve Cavello thinks. Who cares what I think,
Right. Yeah, no, that obviously sociologically it's going to happen both top down, bottom up, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation, especially down at the bottom. And we talk to faculty all across our campus, and they want both. People are looking for sort of leadership at the higher levels of the university, but there's also a skepticism because things could be handed down to you that you don't like, and especially if it's coming from the chancellor's office in Long Beach, Southern California. But back to that Senate meeting that we presented at a couple months ago, just so happened that, as part of the shared governance process, the provost of our university, who's second in command after the president, the one who's sort of doing a lot of the policy, was actually in that meeting. And one of our things that we didn't know was, did the president and the provost have a position? Was this on their agenda of concern? How seriously were they taking it? And his comments during that meeting really reassured us that at the highest level at our university, they are having these conversations. They have a high level understanding of it. It's already on their agenda at that level. Yeah.
And, the one sort of, I think how you described it, Steve, of, it's an intermingling of leadership from the top and sometimes implementation and policymaking from all of us that are, in the classroom or supporting learning. There is a real challenge with making university-wide policy about this, and I think about it in terms of the research output of universities. So, in my home discipline of communication, I could see our local RTP document having some real guardrails in terms of artificial intelligence, right? Because we want to make sure people are doing their own writing, that kind of thing. A lot of the same concerns that people had about this with students from the jump. If you're in biology and you're not utilizing artificial intelligence in order to map new possibilities and do new research, you are way behind the curve, and you're doing a disservice to yourself and to the broader scientific community. I mean, the protein folding problem that was solved by AlphaFold, right? We're talking about something that would have taken us at current levels of technology and human expertise, another several hundred years to unpack, as opposed to the program that virtually solved that for all known proteins, over the course of a matter of months. So I think that the solutions to this, there has to be some participation from the bottom. It can't just be leadership from the top, because not all solutions are going to work for all disciplines and all units.
Thanks, Steve. Other thoughts, questions people want to share?
Ruben, I love this idea of just turning AI loose on the campus and being what do you think? We have a problem. I was just talking about with some colleagues where we have every document that the university's ever produced on the website, and it's all indexed. And so if you search for a policy on something, you're just as likely to encounter a policy from 2002 as you are from 2022, which creates just an incredible amount of confusion and mismanagement of resources. And I was thinking boy, I would love to turn an AI bot loose on all the web pages on campus and be put everything out of date into a pile. And, it doesn't mean you delete it, but you don't index it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Ollie says they're more likely to get 2002. Well,
it's a completely true story, guys. It really is. I've searched for policy on things, and I know documents exist, but there's such a clutter of old documents. And this is something that's too big. I mean, the Open University, we've got 10,000 students just in computing. We're a very big university. It's too big for a person to do.
Right.
It's a perfect tool for AI. I'm being very expressionful with my hands here, but I've got the camera off. Any further questions, my colleagues? There's quite a few of us in the chat here. Just in case you've not seen my message while waiting for people to think of ideas, Janos, could you put your email address into the chat for me, please? You can send it directly to me. Don't need to publish to everyone, so that we can put you into the swag winning pot, as you have been randomly chosen by my finger. Yeah. So there's no hands up. I will say, both Nick and Zach, I find this really interesting. And it just, as you probably noticed, my mind goes a bit wild whenever you say something that kind of triggers a train of thoughts. It just goes wild, thinking, well, how could we change this? How could we make this happen? And I must admit, I came from a point of view where I was a teacher in a school. I moved into higher education, and when I first sat down at a school meeting, and people, colleagues of my level, started saying no to things, I was like, you can say no. People at the bottom could have a conversation about having an impact on decision making. It was my mind was blown. It truly was. Great. Commissioner, do you want to put your microphone on?
There you go.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. So my question is more centered because my title is Student Success Director with a primary role of academic advising. And so a lot of times with the student facing roles, honestly, like we've been talking about, it always seems like it takes a lot of time, but being that it feels like we're kind of not lower on the totem pole, let's say further away from those places where decisions are made, it can be very tedious and trying as well. Are there any recommendations there or any type of advice in that instance?
So Nick and I have had a lot of thoughts and conversations about AI and advising. So if you ever want to follow up like offline, we'd be happy to have that chat too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We actually tried to build something this summer. It didn't go great, but the idea is there.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I can't speak for how things are on anyone else's campus, right? But like on our campus, one of the things that we found is the sort of ambiguity of this moment means you have a lot of capacity to act within your sphere where you are before somebody else is going to come in and say, stop doing that, or that's not what we're doing. It seems like in this moment of like all of this ambiguity and anxiety, it's much more likely that you're going to start doing something and then somebody else is going to say like, hey, that's interesting, tell me about that, than like you implementing a policy at like your student learning center or in a student-facing advising role. Like I would just start setting the policy that you think would be the right policy at your local level, and wait for either your hand to get shaken and congratulations or slapped. And I can't tell you what's more likely, but I do think in these moments of real ambiguity, like not enough of us just take initiative to be like, well, what do I, our God King question about this was sort of tongue in cheek, but it was sort of like, well, what would you do? And
one point on that is that we actually met with advising because we see there's a lot of potential here and for AI to change and improve and revolutionize advising itself. But one thing we heard from the sort of equivalent of one of the people who works here, that's sort of what you're doing, is the move in advising that she said is sort of moving into the people-to-people, person-to-person kind of role, and that AI might begin to handle a lot of that stuff that used to be just sort of like pointing here, but then that advising actually becomes a form of way of actually meeting and talking with students about a wider range of things at that human-to-human level. Whereas the AI handles a lot of those other tasks that are a little more tedious or just kind of, the standard thing over and over. And to us, that was exciting news to hear. And that they're already experimenting with this and, trying to get budgets and things changed to help implement things here on campus to integrate AI, but also to begin to change the whole nature of advising itself towards that human-to-human model.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback. And you guys will probably be hearing from me as well.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Yvonne. How has AI affected the teaching of writing at your university?
Well, I will tell you that I'm back in an administrative role this semester, but in spring, I was teaching our senior level writing class. And I decided to just do radical openness with students. I showed them how to use ChatGPT on the first day of class. And only one person in class had ever even heard of it before. And I just asked that they be similarly vulnerable and transparent with me, tell me when they were using it and when they weren't. And I would say results of that were incredibly uneven. Right now, I would say that it's less of a vector change than it is just a broad disruption with incredible inconsistency in terms of implementation across writing, across different disciplines, and even within the same discipline with different instructors. And the thing that we have to realize is that's anxiety producing for us. Can you imagine how terrible that is for a student? To like walk into one class and then the teacher's like, here's how to use ChatGPT. We're going to use it for every writing assignment. And then the next class they go into, there's this instructor suspects that some people used AI. And so they bulk refer the entire class to the Student Rights and Responsibilities Office for plagiarism processing, right? Like that's a horrid position to put students in.
Yeah, I find that that's true because there's some faculty that are so against it and think it's cheating and plagiarism, while others want to embrace it. And so in my class, when I said, well, you can use ChatGPT for idea generation and for revision. And then I had a student go, oh, but my other professor says that's cheating. Any kind of ChatGPT is cheating. And I'm not a cheater. And I was like, I wasn't trying to say you're a cheater or you in particular. You get this balking reaction. So because students have been exposed to that, one professor is for it, the other professor balks at it, you get confusion. And it makes it difficult to teach any kind of anything without consistency across the board. So there needs to be more agreement as to how ChatGPT has to be handled. And at least at my school, we agreed, or they made the policy that it's okay to tell students that ChatGPT is for idea generation, and that if you use information from ChatGPT, you have to cite ChatGPT like any other source. And then they said, but you cannot use ChatGPT to write your essay for you, and you cannot use ChatGPT for your discussion forum responses. So they did make those rules quite clear when you can and cannot use it. That came very fast. And I remember this fall or last spring, they had said they were going to focus on teacher evaluation or something. Then, of course, AI came, and now everything is AI. And so everything teacher evaluation, I guess, is for next year or something, because it just the rapid speed of change required a rapid change in the plagiarism policy. And so some schools want to sweep it under the rug and other schools are embracing it. And so it's this kind of psychotic division among faculty that confuses students.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. And that's really what we were trying to get here today, is to think about how that confusion is really going to make the policy process and the governance process really challenging in a situation where it's already very, very slow. And it's great. But coming up with policy that's going to satisfy all of this, we're still in early days. This is part of the disruption. Right now, it's kind of free for all, everyone doing what they want, and then some places closing the doors on certain things. But this is where we want to see that what you're describing, Yvonne, how that matches up with how universities actually make decisions about curriculum, about retention and promotion, about assessment and writing proficiency, at a policy level.
UCLA is beside itself. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, thanks so much. I think we're at time, and that was honestly a great way to end it. Thanks everybody so much.
Thank you so much.
Nick, Zach, thanks so much for your presentation. Thank you to everyone for attending, not just this session, but the whole conference. On behalf of the ADEIL, ADEIL as a whole and the conference organising team, which I'm a member, thank you for a wonderful, wonderful day/evening for those of us on this side of the pond. The winner of the session was, I think I said it was Janos, so that's been recorded now. Please just a last reminder, please be sure to complete the conference evaluation. The link is in the chat for you to access and use after the conference. You only need to do it once. It's just, this is the final opportunity to remind you. We've got 15 minutes and then the closing session where you'll hear from Tracy and Gloria. So everyone, thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful final closing session and a great rest of your day.